The rest of the Christmas decorations will be down after today. How many of you still have your Christmas decorations up? Yeah, I'm with you. Now, don't get too worried about that because it's still really the season of Christmas, isn't it? Today really is the beginning of the season of Epiphany. You've heard of the 12 days of Christmas, right? And so the 12 days of Christmas last all the way up until the season of Epiphany. And then at the season of Epiphany, it's tradition. Really, the tradition did not start until about the 4th century in North Africa. That's when they discovered that there was a festival of what's called Epiphany. And they were celebrating the coming of the Magi. And so that's kind of helped in terms of forming the church calendar. And so the season of Epiphany begins with the story of the wise men, but it doesn't stop there. It continues through the life of Jesus. So that's kind of how it works out. Now, I know we were traveling at Christmas time, and we were in a neighborhood with our family down in Georgia. The day after Christmas, I saw Christmas trees already on the curbside, ready for the trash man to carry them off. Because in our world today, many times after December 25th is over, Christmas is done. But that's not exactly how it works out in terms of the church calendar. Now, before we get started this morning, I want to credit Dr. Charles Cosgrove for much of the content of the sermon that I'm doing today. He did this as a devotional, or did some of this content as a devotional at Northern Seminary when I was doing my doctorate work there. And he really did a fantastic job. So I took some of his stuff for today's sermon, and I want to give him credit for that. But let me invite you to find a Bible. If you don't have one with you this morning, you should be able to find one in the pew in front of you. And open to Matthew chapter 2. And I'm going to invite Wes Russell to come and read the first 23 verses here. So it's kind of a long text. But we're going to walk through this together this morning, but let's read it together. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 23.
And I'll be reading from the NIV version, Matthew 2, verses 1 through 23. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose up and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests, teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent to them Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in the dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene.
All right. Thank you, Wes. Epiphany. That's not exactly a common word in today's language, is it? But sometimes we use it, don't we? Sometimes we say things like, "I had an epiphany," right? What do you mean by that when you say that? The dictionary actually defines the word epiphany. It gives two definitions. First of all, the Christian festival observed on January 6th, commemorating the manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles in the persons of the Magi, 12th day. So that's one definition for epiphany. But the other definition is this, and I'll put this on the screen here. A sudden, intuitive perception of or insight into the reality or essential meaning of something, usually initiated by some simple, homely, or commonplace occurrence or experience. Now think about that for a moment. That's kind of what the story of the wise men is all about, isn't it? The story of the Magi is about these people coming, following a star, on a journey to discover what God is up to, and then finding in a very humble place, in the home of a carpenter, the Messiah. They find God in a very common place. Now, we read about Epiphany in Matthew chapter 2, but again, the celebration of Epiphany is something that happens much later, so you won't see the word Epiphany in the Bible. It really doesn't begin until the 4th century. But again, this feast of Epiphany was found in North Africa in the 4th century, the celebration of the wise men, and it kind of brings it all together for us, kind of tying up the Christmas season as we step into the next season. Now, we're not far into 2019. It feels strange even saying that, doesn't it? I wrote a check this week, and of course I wrote 2018 by habit, as most of us will do for the next few weeks, if you even write checks anymore, right? But when we write 2019, it seems strange. But as we begin this new year, it's appropriate that we talk about what's God up to, what's God doing, and how can we join God in that. And we're going to be walking through this story in Matthew chapter 2 this morning. And in Matthew, the Magi first come to King Herod. Look at what it says in verses 1 and 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, you might say, why are they going to King Herod? Well, they've heard or they have seen this star, and for them it signals the birth of a king. And where do you think a king might be born? In the palace of a king. So that's what they do. They come to Herod. Now, Herod hears of their reason for coming, and he's a little frightened by it. In fact, he says, "A king," and he looks around, and there's no one born in his house to be king, and he wonders, does this mean that his power is coming to an end? Does it mean that someone else is going to take over his throne? So we're going to read more about Herod's actions in just a moment, or talk more about them in just a moment. But again, Herod dismisses the wise men and tells them, "You guys come back and let me know when you find this king." Now, if I ask you this morning to draw the nativity scene, so we passed out crayons or markers this morning and everybody decorate a piece of paper with a Christmas nativity scene, you'd probably draw a brown stable. Most of us would draw a star over that stable. If we're really creative, you might draw a sheep or a cow or some other animal lying around. You'd probably include Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. Shepherds, and possibly most of us would put wise men in the picture, right? That's how we see most nativity scenes. But as we read this story, we find out that the wise men weren't actually there with the shepherds and animals at the stable. In fact, they come much later. In fact, Matthew tells us that they find Mary and Joseph where? In a house, it says. So we have to understand that the timeline is quite different than we often think of it. In fact, Matthew is the one who records the story of the Magi. Luke is the one who includes the story of the shepherds. And Luke doesn't mention the Magi, and Matthew doesn't really talk about the shepherds. So very likely, if you're looking at a time frame, this event is maybe a year or two after Jesus has been born when these guys show up at their house. So who are these guys coming from the east? Where do they come from? What country, we might ask? We don't really know. We simply see they are called Magi. Now, Magi probably refers to sages in an eastern court. Now, sages in a king's service would have been these people who give the king counsel on ancient wisdom, interpretation of dreams. They would have studied the signs in the heavens. That would have been their job. Now, the Magi of Matthew's gospel here, they see a new star, and the star leads them to Judea. And they go, again, representing the kings. We say they are kings. We sing the song, "We Three Kings of Orient Are." They're probably not really kings, but they represent kings, and so it's not too far of a stretch to say that they are kings. But they're coming to bring gifts to honor this new king that's being born. Now, how many are there? We three kings, we often say. We have three wise men. Do you know the Bible doesn't really tell us how many there are? It just says that they bring three gifts. Some traditions say that there are as many as 12 Magi. We don't really know the number. What are their names, we might say? Well, we don't have names either. By the 6th century, though, they did attach names to the Magi. The earliest names that are mentioned are Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. So I don't know where they got those names, but that has kind of become the standard of their names in the West. According to an 8th century English monk and scholar, the Magi represent Asia, Ethiopia, and Europe coming to Christ. Now, all kinds of traditions and information around these three Magi. But look at what we read in Matthew. Look at verse 9 with me. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to there it is, house, not stable, right? They saw the child with his mother, Mary. They bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. So they leave Herod's palace and they follow this star to Bethlehem. And there they find Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. I mean, think about this scene for a moment. We've heard it in the story so many times, we forget how strange this would have been. Can you imagine Mary and Joseph in this house, humble house probably, and these three guys, if there are three of them by the way, show up and they're dressed in this Eastern garb and they're bringing gifts, probably very kingly looking in stature. They would have stepped up to the house and can you imagine, what are you guys here for? We've come to bring gifts to a king. And Mary and Joseph have experienced already a few things that have tipped them off to the fact that this is no ordinary child. And once again, God is confirming to them this Messiah that's born. God is doing something here. And now these kings are coming, bringing these gifts. Now, hospitality would have required Mary and Joseph to provide a meal for them. They may have even spent the night with them, or maybe even a few days. We don't really know. The whole scene, though, is wondrous, isn't it? And awkward, all at the same time. Now, what about the gifts that they're bringing? The first gift is what? Gold, exactly. That's a gift fit for a king, isn't it? The Roman historian Seneca tells us that in Parthia, it was custom that no one approach a king without a gift. And to bring gold is the appropriate gift, a king of metals for the King of Kings. Jesus was a king. He was man born to be king. But he came to reign not by force, but by love. He came to rule over our hearts, not from a throne, but from a cross. And we're going to gather at the table in just a few moments and remember why Jesus came. Now, the second gift is significant also. It's what? Anybody? Frankincense, exactly. Did you know frankincense was what was used in temple worship? It was used by a priest. And so the gift of frankincense gives us the sense that Jesus is a priest. The priest, in Latin, the word for priest is the word pontifex. It means bridge builder. Certainly Jesus had come to build a bridge between man and God, between humankind and the divine. Jesus is not only king, but he is priest. The third gift is an interesting gift, and I wonder when Mary and Joseph saw this gift if they scratched their heads for a few moments, but it's the gift of myrrh. Myrrh is the gift that you would give someone who is about to die. It doesn't seem like a good baby gift. I don't think too many people have that on their baby registers nowadays, right? But myrrh, it tips us off to the fact that Jesus had come to die. It's what they would use to embalm bodies, you see. That's what myrrh was. You see, these gifts show us who Jesus is and what he has come to do. Now, what happens to these sages, we might say? Where do they go from here? Now, we don't have a lot of information about them. Wouldn't it be cool, though, if these guys returned to their home countries sharing the story of Jesus? Wouldn't it be cool if we had more information on them? What if we knew that they went and they experienced the man Jesus, and they were able to see that he came and that he died for the sins of the world? But we really don't know if this happened. We simply have one sentence at the end of verse 12. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. That's all we have. That's all we know of these Magi. We never hear from them again. But the story of Jesus' birth doesn't end there. Matthew records what happens next. Look at verse 13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." So the angel warns Joseph in a dream. Joseph knows what this is like, right? He's already had one angel or angelic appearance in a dream, and now another. And so he listens, he obeys, he knows that the angel knows what he's talking about. Now, this is no accident that Jesus goes to Egypt. It's not plan B. This is all a part of God's plan. Think about Egypt for a moment. What's significant of Egypt? We know that historically Egypt had kind of been seen as the enemy to Israel, right? In fact, much of Israel's story is in Egypt. You remember another Joseph that went to Egypt. This Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, and he travels down to Egypt, and there he is used by God in tremendous ways. Rising to power in Pharaoh's court, he's able to save the people of God from famine. And now, another Joseph going to Egypt. This time with God himself as a baby. Traveling to a land where God had once rescued his people out of. And now again, God is rescuing his people, but in a different way, in a more permanent way. And out of Egypt he will come. You see, God is tying the story together. Do you see how that works? The Old Testament story is happening through Jesus once again. A helpless baby, God himself, a refugee in Egypt, in a land where the people of God were once slaves. Look at verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. He gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. What a horrific story, isn't it? While the Joseph in our story is on his way to Egypt, Herod sends armed men to kill the children of Bethlehem, all who are under 2 years of age. This horror puts the entire city into mourning. Matthew thinks of Rachel, the wife of Jacob, who according to tradition lies buried outside of Bethlehem. And people say, even today, when Jewish mothers lose their children, Rachel weeps, is what they say. Matthew quotes Jeremiah. He says, "This is what the Lord says, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more." What a scene, right? What a horrific story. But God is in all of this. God is working. God is moving. God is preparing. God is doing what He needs to do to set the stage for the ministry of Jesus. We're going to be getting into in the next few weeks. But let's pause for just a moment before we come to the table together. And let's ask the question, where are we in the story? As we begin 2019, as we step into this new year, how are we responding to what God is doing? Are we like the Magi? Are we searching for Him? Are we looking for God to move? And when we see what God is doing, do we quickly join Him in it? That's what the Magi do. They come and they bring gifts and they participate in what God is doing in a tremendous way. And we need to ask ourselves this morning, would we be willing to join God in that way? Would we be willing to step out, offering whatever we can to worship Him? Or are we more like Herod in the story? Are we threatened by Jesus? Are we doing what we can do to make sure that Jesus doesn't get too much of us? Do we kill and destroy to make sure that our territory is protected? Are we more like Herod, or are we more like the Magi? You remember the song, "What Child Is This?" We sang it this morning in first service. Do you remember the final verse? I'll put this on the screen because I think this is an appropriate place for us to land this morning. One more slide there. "So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh. Come peasant king to own him. The King of kings salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him." Do you see the story of God coming to fruition in the story of the Magi? A humble, simple family, Mary, Joseph, and a baby who is the King, who is God Himself, who has come to reign, who's come to be our priest, as Hebrews says, once and for all, who has come to die on the cross for our sins, to give His life for you and for me. That's what the story is all about. It's an appropriate Sunday this morning, or appropriate time this morning to come to the table, because you often don't think of the wise men and communion as being necessarily the same thing, but they are the same thing. And as we think about the gifts of the Magi, we come this morning to the table receiving the gift that He gave to us. The gift of His body broken for us. The gift of His blood shed for us. And this morning we're going to take a few minutes and respond this morning. I don't know where you find yourself this morning. If you could confess this morning that His body was broken for you and His blood was shed for you, you're invited to come and participate. You're invited to come and take a piece of bread and place it in your mouth and say, His body was broken for me. You're invited to come and to take a small cup of grape juice and drink it and to confess His blood was shed for me. See, Paul instructs us, as we come to the table, we should examine our hearts. We should take this as an opportunity to reflect, what is God doing? Are we joining Him in it? Are we faithful? Are we obedient? And as we come and receive, we examine and we confess and we participate. This morning, as God would lead you, the Green family is going to come and bring the elements this morning. And in just a moment, you're going to be invited to come. There are offering plates here in the front. If you've brought an offering, you can come and bring that. There's an altar this morning. If you'd like to come and kneel and pray, you come and do that. You come and receive the communion as God would lead you. Come now. His body broken for us. His blood shed for us. Come now as God would lead you.